Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Will Chamberlain, who is a Cupertino conservative. He works on the right wing via a justice/law point of view, and in this conversation, we speak about his thoughts on actions within the Trump regime that are being combated via legal means and what that spells with regard to where our country is headed legally, politically, and so on. Found him to be a great guy. You can find his work down there in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Will Chamberlain. Yeah, it feels weird. Feels really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for giving me some of your time.
Sure.
Do you have any clue what the heck is going on? Because I
With
don't.
Tariffs or with the law?
Yeah, there's tariffs. I guess the law, like, where do you have a clue? And can you help me understand from?
Sure. I'm a lawyer by training. I have been following in reasonable detail what's been going on with like the injunctions and all the immigration stuff.
Yeah.
Tariffs. I mean, I have some idea what I'm talking. I mean, I'm an econ major, so I like know some things and, you know, did the reading when I was in college, but am I an expert on this stuff? No, I'm definitely, I've tried to not make claims on tariffs because I don't really know what the end result is going to be. I could see it going badly. I could see it not going badly. I don't know. You know?
Yeah. But you've advocated from the conservative point of view for, I guess, the return of Trump. From your point of view, like, what is going on, and is it kind of what you expected? Did you vote
for the
this?
most part.
That's the meme,
Well,
right?
it's a surprise in the positive sense. Like my expectations have been exceeded. I was for the second term. You know, I worked for Governor DeSantis, both on his presidential campaign and for his executive office. I, for a long time, really believed that Trump's first term would be indicative of his second term, and that Trump's first term had a lot of missed opportunities and a lot of issues that related to his ability to manage the government. And it seemed like the deep state kind of kept getting one over on him. You know, I don't know if you've watched Yes Minister, but that's what it felt like. Yes Minister. It felt like the new guy comes in, wants to change things, and the existing system thwarts him completely. Mm-hmm. And that fit into sort of a thesis I have that we needed a lawyer in charge. And the reason we needed a lawyer in charge is because we've escaped this kind of period where bipartisan things happen. And now it's not about making deals so much as it's about exercising the power of your office effectively. And I thought DeSantis was really, really good at that. Like, if there's, you can say what you want about DeSantis, but as an executive and as a governor, he is outstanding at getting a handle on what is my legal authority and then how can I use it to the maximum. And so I wanted that in the president. Now, Trump has learned the lessons of his first term. It's very obvious to me that he has. He has hired a bunch of new people that he trusts, that are loyal to him, that are giving him good advice about how much authority he has, where he can actually be aggressive, where it's unclear how much authority he has. So he should be aggressive in those spots to try and test the courts and push, risk some losses in order to try and advance. So he's just doing really well across a large number of areas. The first time I, was even worried was this tariff stuff, because I was worried that, there's just going to be this chaos in the market. And, if it goes on for too long, then, Congress will step in and rebel against him, or who knows what will happen, and we'll lose in 2 years. But outside of the tariffs, I really have had nothing to complain about at all.
Mm-hmm. Could you help me understand how these small-time, lower-level judges, small-time, they're judges, they're honorable people, of course, but like a judge in San Francisco being able to tell the president what to do, what not to do, like how that actually works, because there's some panic, like he's ignoring the law or he's thwarting his authority, but if any given lower level judge just can make an injunction and stop the president of the United States from doing anything, then the president of the United States has no power. So how does that reasonably work, and how do these things like shape up? If you want to get into the nitty gritty of like one example.
Well, okay, so Judges obviously have the power to issue injunctions that control the behavior of the parties in front of them. So if you're in litigation in front of a judge and the judge says do X or don't do X, you kind of have to obey and comply. So let's just start with that kind of assumption. So sometimes the government is a party, and sometimes the government might be violating the law with respect to one individual or do something that is legally ambiguous. And then the judge decides, before we go any further, I'm going to issue an injunction to stop you from harming that person or stop you from continuing down this course of action that will cause irreparable harm going forward. So there are kind of two ways this can start kind of expanding beyond the scope of the parties. The first is very formal in the sense that it could be like a class action lawsuit. Like somebody says, I represent a class of individuals that have been similarly harmed by the government. And so if you agree that that's true, that I represent somebody who's been harmed in the same way, in the same manner, judicial economy is going to suggest that we be treated as a class. And so that your rulings on me bind both parties as to all potential class members. Mm-hmm. So that's one way. And then another way is if you make a ruling, if a judge ends up making a ruling that sort of, even outside of a class context, has a broad sweep, like it just makes a ruling on a new area of law, that if that is the law, then the government obviously is going to stop doing certain things. Like, for example, if you could say that, there might be an injunction on the Alien Enemies Act, but if the Supreme Court issues a rule, or if a district court issues a ruling that says the Alien Enemies Act can't be lawfully applied in this instance because, for example, me, the judge, has to agree that there is a war or a predatory incursion or whatever. Mm. Well, if that ruling stands, then it might just deter a government from trying to use the Alien Enemies Act in a similar way because they expect a similar ruling. Mm-hmm. So those are the ways that you can that's how you sort of get to the idea of a nationwide injunction as sort of an academic manner. What's gone wrong? What's gone wrong is you have judges deciding too aggressively to adopt a class action procedure. That's what happened in this case with the Trent Aragua defendants. You had James Boasberg decide to essentially agree that to certify a class action of all the defendants who might be deported and then block every one of their deportations. You also have these weird jurisdictional problems where these judges are eagerly reaching to try and have the right to decide a case. So in the Trent Aragua case, and it comes up also in the Abrego Garcia case, all these immigrant cases, basically these immigrants are challenging their removal, right? Or they're challenging their detention in some cases. Well, the question then is what is the claim? Like what is the legal claim that is actually being made? And the answer is that it's a habeas corpus claim, right? It's a right to say, I am being wrongfully detained. You, jailer, release me. And the idea of habeas corpus is the jailer shows up and explain why this man is detained. Well, blah, blah, blah. That's all. That's what habeas corpus is. That requires that the suit actually be brought where the person is being detained, because the idea is it's like you need jurisdiction over the jailer.
Yeah.
You need to say, you, jailer, come here. And that should have excluded the DC judges from jurisdiction because these people were being detained in Texas and Louisiana in the Fifth Circuit. There's a reason for that. Like the ICE is not stupid; they know where the good judges are, so they want to keep it down there. So they were playing games of jurisdiction, they were playing games of class certification, and then they're just straight up playing games of the law more generally. Like they're just reading the law wrong and then coming up with ideas that they have the ability to dictate to the government how it disperses funds, when it disperses funds, you name it. There's also another issue is that they haven't been demanding bonds to issue these injunctions. So the idea is that, say, this comes up in these grant fund disbursement cases where the State Department is trying to withhold money from going out the door based on these former contracts, and these nonprofits are suing to try and force these funds to be dispersed. So we've had a few injunctions where the court has said, you, USA, must disperse this money, or you, State Department, must disperse this money right now, before we've gotten to the legal merits. There's a jurisdictional problem because those are contract damages. They should only be heard in the Court of Federal Claims, not in any other court. Mm-hmm. But then the second problem is there should be a bond imposed, because if you're going to force all that money to go out the door without any guarantee that it's going to come back if the government wins, then without a bond, there's no security. So there is something called an injunction bond that would say, okay, you can have this money come to you, but you have to place a bond that guarantees that you will pay the money back in the event that you lose. So we're not seeing a lot of those. And that's actually one of the reasons the Supreme Court struck that down. And the Supreme Court also obviously ruled against the plaintiffs in the Trendeiragua case and stripped jurisdiction from Boasberg in D.C. So, we're actually seeing this stuff start to finally get fixed. But, if you're talking about, that was, I guess, a 10-minute explanation of why have things gone wrong. Well, that's the variety of reasons.
So it's obvious that the buzzword is the weaponization of the justice system. It's obvious that the justice system has been working on behalf of certain parties to the exclusion of other parties. It hasn't been impartial, perhaps forever. When it went after Trump and Merrick Garland and the DOJ and the last administration started to, aggressively pursue their political rivals, it showed this institution of law to be a weapon. It's not just some neutral institution. Where do we go from there? Does that not inherently make the whole thing just a game of power now? Aren't we kind of in a postmodern moment or a post-liberal moment where there is no appeal to neutrality? Because once it's corrupted, then it's just going to be used back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
We're darn close. We nearly passed it. To their credit, the Supreme Court stood in the way, right? We shouldn't hesitate to give the Supreme Court credit for saying, no, the president is immune from this stuff, and putting a stop to a number of the cases against him. They didn't stop all of them, but they stopped a number of them. But that's certainly, I don't think we're fully in the postmodern moment where the law is only power, but we are so very close to it. And for what happened in New York, for example, is actually a good example of the postmodern moment. You could totally read that case as just straight up Kafkaesque. President Trump was prosecuted for being the victim of a blackmail scheme, and his criminal act was having an underling click the wrong box on a drop-down menu in QuickBooks. That's really the gravamen of what the crime was, because how exactly do you classify a hush money expense? Classifying it as legal doesn't seem obviously wrong, and yet that's essentially what the criminal charge was. That was a misleading statement.
This is the Stormy Daniels?
Stormy Daniels, yeah. Right. Okay. So that's the idea. That's, the payment to Stormy Daniels was classified as a legal expense in private books that nobody was ever going to see and where nobody would rely on, so it wasn't fraud. But the idea is that constituted a falsification of business records. That was the Stormy Daniels case. So that was lawfare. Obviously, clearly, that actually got a conviction, amazingly enough. And the only reason Trump didn't go to jail is because he became president and essentially mooted it. And the New York judge had to agree to sentence him to nothing, unconditional discharge. But boy, were we close. And I mean, what does it mean for the law? I mean, the law is still, in the normal scheme and then everybody's normal daily lives, the law still kind of functions the way it functions and has functioned. If your business is suing other businesses and there's no political valence to what you're doing, the law is going to still be the law. And we do actually still have a good system of law and order in this country. But if there is a political valence to what you're doing, we are mostly in postmodern world until we get to the Supreme Court. Then it seems like the judges are trying to do their job. But prior to the Supreme Court, we're in postmodern world.
Yeah. Is that bothersome to you?
Oh, yeah. Very much so. And because, the law is what allows everybody to kind of figure out what their behavior should be, to form contracts, and it's like a very, very beautiful thing that really makes our society function. It's really one of the things that makes America great. It's the Anglo-Saxon legal system, common law, the consistency of the rule of law. And it also is, what are we actually trying to preserve if you're kind of a conservative right-leaning person? Well, you're trying to preserve the institutions of the country. And a functioning objective court system, an objective justice system, that's a big part of it. So losing that really stinks. And it really stinks that the left has gone so far off the deep end with this stuff. It was really damaging to the country. And I think that's a big part of why they lost, honestly, in this last election. I think it's a big part of why they lost.
They triggered an immune response from normal Americans.
Yes, I think normal Americans were not impressed by the lawfare. I think that's very much true, and I've heard that from normies who voted Trump, who just had quite enough of it, who thought it was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. In your NatCon speech, I don't know from what year, I think it was probably just last year, you talk about lawfare. You give a nice little, like a 9-minute speech about justifying lawfare, justifying the rule of law, and justifying using the courts from the conservative or the right-wing direction to correct and to punish even the left-wing direction. Once the cat is kind of out of the bag, are you not kind of making a case in a certain respect that if our enemies are going to use the law, then we are going to use the law? And does that, even if your ultimate goal is to correct the law, aren't you abusing the law in a certain
to a
respect?
degree? Yeah, I think I'm a big believer. I've read a bunch of game theory, reciprocal altruism. Like, you can't allow yourself to be exploited. And so, the cooperative outcome, the game theoretic outcome, is the one where we aren't using lawfare against each other. That's the one that's best for everybody. But in a world where Democrats insist on defecting and insist on using the legal system against conservatives, we have to be willing to use it in return. Otherwise, they'll just keep exploiting us. So that's why the thesis of that speech was that we should use non-frivolous lawfare against the left, which is aggressive, non-frivolous cases, bringing cases that maybe we think probably won't win, but that are still non-frivolous, that won't get us sanctioned, because that's the standard the left has been using. And so I think that jives. I understand that people might say, well, that's an abuse of the law, but it's really the same argument in any sort of game theory circumstance. Like, you can simultaneously believe that the goal should be we all cooperate, but accept that you cannot just accept the other side defecting repeatedly.
Yeah. Well, where do you think, what do you think should be the goal right now? And is it being affected by the Trump administration? And is the institution of the law, does it need to be scaled back more? Does it need to be burnt to the ground? Can it be reformed? And what game reforms that system?
So
in which
I think
games happen?
There's a number of things that can be done. It does look like DOJ is taking the right tack. They're going after the universities really hard. I know a lot of people, I've seen people on the right, especially the dissident right, kind of complain that they're focused on anti-Semitism, but understand that that's just the biggest vulnerability that these universities have. They very, very clearly violated Title VI on this front. They're just so vulnerable to having all their money pulled as a result of what they let happen on their college campuses over the last 2 years. So I think people need to understand that it's not because Jews are more important than white people. It's because that is the easiest and most obvious weapon to use against the adversary.
It has political valence, whereas anti-white racism, which has been incredibly explicit on campuses, isn't as politically expedient. You can't prosecute. It's
not as politically expedient. If you were thinking, which case are we going to bring? If we must win, which case do we bring? Do we bring the anti-Semitism case, or do we bring the anti-white discrimination case? It seems like the answer, if that answer, it answers itself. Clearly, like, the anti-Semitism case is going to be stronger, more valence, more likely to lead to convictions, more likely to hold up in court if you yank funding based on it. So I think that's why that's there. So DOJ is doing a good job on that front. There's more that can be done. One of the really interesting things that the Trump administration is doing is these death sentences to law firms. I don't think there's been a huge amount of discussion about these executive orders, but he put out an executive order about Perkins Coie, for instance, that one of the law firms that was involved in Russiagate and the Steele dossier.
Hmm.
And he put out an executive order that said Perkins Coie doesn't get to send any of its lawyers into government buildings. If you're a Perkins Coie employee or a Perkins Coie contractor, you can't do that. And also that effectively makes clear that Perkins Coie is persona non grata if you're a private interest, if you're just a company and you're thinking about who do I want to retain as my lawyers. If you're retaining Perkins Coie, you might get punished for that. Basically, they're persona non grata on the Hill. That's a death sentence to a big law firm, especially a big law firm with any kind of DC related practice. Like all those partners that work in, you name it. I mean, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, straight up lobbying, government affairs, legislative affairs. There's huge DC practices around all this stuff, and those lawyers will have to leave the firm, because they won't be able to get business. And then that'll also affect the firm's broader litigation practices, broader corporate practices, because these big companies are thinking, well, if I hire Perkins Coie, I'm not going to have any entree with the government at all. I cannot be persona non grata with the government, so I'm out. So he's done that with a few firms. A few are trying to push back and forth. Paul Weiss made a deal. That was he put out one of these executive orders for Paul Weiss, a major top 10 law firm, and the head of the law firm went to DC and met with Trump and was like, let's make a deal because we can't survive if this sticks. There's a lot of power in that. And I think it's a necessary corrective to the lawfare, because one of the other things that has happened in the past few years, not even just the past few, it's gone on for longer than just a few, is that these big law firms have used their pro bono practices almost exclusively to further progressive causes and to defend progressive defendants. Good example of this, all the DC bar was perfectly happy to defend Al-Qaeda down at Guantanamo Bay, talking about the best traditions of the bar, defending due process even for the most reprobate criminals. And none of them showed up at January 6 defendants. None of them. Not one of those DC law firms, those white shoe DC lawyers. I had friends like Bill Shipley who were flying from Hawaii to DC on a regular basis to go defend J6 defendants in court. And a lot of those J6 defendants were stuck with either public defenders or who hated them, or with very exploitative criminal defense lawyers who were using them to make a buck and were not serving their best interests. So Trump's pardoned them. Great. Very good, because a lot of these people got really screwed, really had terrible criminal defenses. And they had that because the DC bar, full of all these brilliant lawyers who don't want to let anybody go without due process, just decided to go completely AFK and not even defend them. So that's another way in which lawfare can function, right? If the pro bono work is all going towards one direction and helping Jack Smith, of all people, that was what Covington was doing with it, then that's another way in which lawfare functions.
Is there we've been talking about a vibe shift since Trump gets elected, and there is kind of, on a political level, in the discourse, there's kind of a shift where the right might be a little ascendant in a way, aesthetically at least. Is there a similar possibility of something like that within the halls of actual power, within the deep state, all these nested corporations and law firms and NGOs and stuff like that? Is there the possibility that where they start shifting direction from always swimming left to, I don't know, swimming in a more conciliatory?
It's possible. And if you create new institutions, they might do that. I mean, you have to assume the default is that they'll swim left. The interesting thing is that the deep state is on the run in a way they were not in the first term. Like that's another big difference between the first and second Trump terms. First term, the deep state was fighting aggressively against him. This time they're scared they're going to get fired. And I think they're just trying to hide and not get terminated. Trump's just got a lot better people around him, a lot more people who are on top of their agencies and who aren't putting up with any insubordination. You hear stories every day. Like just today, we heard the story of there was this NATO military attache or NATO military head who was, made I think a general, but like a high ranking military official who was relieved because she thought in her wisdom, oh, we're going to dig in for 4 years. She wouldn't put up the portraits of Trump and Vance in the office. It's like, well, that makes it really easy. You're fired. Go find something else to do with your time. So we have, I forget if I'm answering your actual question here, but I remember there is the second Trump administration is doing a lot better job in terms of being on top of the deep state.
Yeah, I'm wondering from this point, and I don't even think we're 90 days in. I was trying to do the math and I forgot to do the calculations, but we're within the first 100 days of this 4-year administration, barring something terribly weird going on. Do you think any of this stuff's going to be really permanent? Like, do you think that there will be an attitude shift? And what would that attitude shift be? Because the MAGA phenomena is a response from normie Americans, from, non-elite Americans trying to tell their elite class, tell the rulers that you are not serving our best interest. I'm wondering if Trump, if that's what he's doing, trying to correct the government to serve America's interests, do you see him taking steps to make that a permanent, like changing the attitude of the government towards its people?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think it's because of the fact that everybody's running scared and realizes they can be fired and realizes that the Republicans aren't the Washington Generals anymore, that we're taking seriously the idea that we get to run the executive branch. That's a vibe shift for the whole deep state and for the civil service going forward, because they know, okay, I have to think about what happens when Republicans get in power again, and like not the old wussy Republicans who would sort of let me do what I wanted, but the MAGA Republicans who are going to insist on us doing what they want. And if I was involved in any shenanigans, political shenanigans trying to keep them out of power, well, I might get fired. So it's hard to say that you're actually going to staff the deep state with a lot more Republicans. That will require civil service reform and some other things. But I still think that there is a durable effect of what Trump is doing and what Vance might well do in the next 8 years. The deep state the deep state and the civil servants would understand that Republicans aren't pushovers anymore, that we're serious, and that we're a party to be reckoned with.
We talk a lot offhandedly about these institutions that are corrupt. We need parallel institutions, but I don't think you're going to be able to create a parallel institution to the United States government. I mean, this is the premier institution. I mean, probably outside of communist China, like the strongest institution in the world. I don't know. I'm probably, you could probably correct me on that and get in.
No, I agree.
Gritty, but you can't really make an alternative institution. From your point of view, what's the necessary thing for Trump to accomplish to correct the direction of the United States government? And is he already doing it with the retraction from NATO? I don't know what this tariff stuff is doing, but that's an economic stratagem. But the global alliance, America's position in the world, if he changes America from being the hegemon to something else, I mean, I don't know what the downstream effects of that are, but will that at least curtail the extent of the U.S. government as a worldwide organization, globalist organization, and make it more of a government for the people, by this people, for this people? And what needs to happen for that to happen?
So I would say that, first, what is the most important thing for Trump to do? It is to prevent the Democrats from getting to a point where they can have durable political power regardless of elections.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's point one. So that's immigration. That's, I think, and he's doing an incredible job. I think that maybe his biggest accomplishment is getting border crossings down 95% year on year. That's remarkable and a real accomplishment in a very short period of time. As for the question of whether or not we're going to be the global hegemon, I guess I disagree with the notion that it's that's something we want to change. And I think the people underestimate the sort of subtle benefits that accrue to the United States as a result of being the world hegemon. And I look back in history, and I don't think the countries that have ceded hegemony have done very well. It has benefited them all that much. They certainly, post-ceding that hegemony, sometimes they've been forced to, but it hasn't been good for them when they have. I mean, think about, are the British better off relative to other countries than they were in the early 1900s or the late 1800s? Seems quite clearly no. The Portuguese, I mean, they have a whole culture built around the sadness and the fado that is rooted in the loss of their overseas possessions and becoming a backwater. Spain, similar. China, when it was going through the Opium Wars era, where it was just weak and at the mercy of the Western powers. So, and you think, okay, so what's actually happening? It's like, well, when we're the hegemon, we get the reserve currency, which is an enormous benefit to Americans every day. We get
as long
the ability,
as we can be good stewards of it, assuming
true, but I mean, it's partially about being good stewards of it, but it's also partially about the fact that it's a reflection of our military dominance and our economic dominance. Right? A good way to think about the government is, why the dollar is so resilient. People say, well, there's nothing backing the dollar. And I say, well, no, it's backed by the institution that is the most powerful military institution in the history of the world, that has the right to collect tax revenue from the 300 million wealthiest people in the history of the world. So it's actually quite a lot backing the dollar. And again, a big part of that is our being the hegemon, that we do have unquestionably the strongest military in the world. Yeah. And we should try and keep that, I think. So is
that necessarily healthy for our nation to be ahead of other nations in that way? Is it good for our people? I mean, I'm kind of bringing up a populist / MAGA point.
I mean, I think the answer has to be yes, unless you're going for some sort of like humbling of our people is good because it will teach them to be more resilient. Like, that doesn't seem right to me. I want the best for Americans, and even if it leads to some, even if there's some inevitable like degeneracy or whatever you want to call it as a result of our free riding or being in this privileged position. We want to be in the privileged position. It's good. We should try and keep that. I went to Israel, and Israel's not in that position. And it's a very interesting thing to realize that one of the problems that the Israeli right has is that they're not able to communicate in English to the American right. And why is that important? It's like, well, they realize that their most important ally is us by a mile. We're in they need us. We're in the catbird seat. They need to persuade us. And that's the position that a slew of other countries are in. We're in the catbird seat. They are dependent on our continued support and friendship. That's a wonderful position to be in. I mean, that's why Trump can do things like, I'm going to impose tariffs on the whole world. And voila, 75 of them come to negotiate with me because we're the hegemon, because we're number one. There's all these things that we can do, and other countries can't. The UK can't do that. They could have 100 years ago. They can't do it now, right? Or they could have 150. You name it. China could have done that with its satrapies and during the dynastic period. They can't do it. I mean, they're trying to get back to that, but they can't do it as effectively now. So I don't know. I kind of, whatever sort of intangible effects it has on the character of American citizens, I think it's not concrete enough to outweigh the obvious, very tangible benefits that American citizens accrue as a result of us being so strong. And I think that people, people might complain, well, it's like, it really would be better for us to not be the hegemon until we actually get there and we realize, this isn't nearly as cool and our standard of living isn't nearly as high. And we're at the mercy of powers who don't necessarily find much appealing about our way of life. So
this is kind of an intangible question, but I'm wondering what your point of view on it is. There's been some from the right, from the dissident right, so-called, there's this critique of the post-war consensus, the mythology of World War II, which establishes that the story justifies America's hegemonic power. But that story is growing long in the tooth. That story is used by the left to control the right with all of this conflating of everything as fascism. it just begs the question, what is the American identity and what is that identity based on? From your point of view, and it seems like you identify as a conservative, but I can't really suss out like where your American theology is, and by that I mean like what is the mythology? Like what makes America America? What
Yeah.
is that? What is the story? And do we need, is part of the conflict, the so-called culture war, like trying to relitigate what we are as a people? And there's a little bit of civil rights. There's a little bit of, the American pie. There's all these different elements of it. Where are we now? What is the story that needs to kind of be broadcast for us to know who we are?
I mean, to me, I think we're a deeply rooted Anglo-Saxon civilization with the combination of the heritage that we got from England with this aggressively American kind of pioneering, innovative spirit. I think that it's sort of that. Those are the big two components. And I mean, I'm not a religious person, so I don't think about it in terms of religiosity. But you could throw Christianity or Judaism, whatever you want. But if we escape the religion debate for a second, those are the two big things I see. We have this incredible Anglo-Saxon heritage on the one hand that gave us the common law, our institutions, the checks and balance, our system of government. And you see that Anglo-Saxon common law heritage work almost everywhere it's tried, and dramatically improve outcomes for people. And we're probably the best exponent of that original heritage.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have this, incredible tradition of our people being pioneering, conquering the wilds, manifest destiny, and then building the most innovative and powerful economy the world has ever seen, and transform dominant culture. So I think both those things are really important. Like I treasured the America I grew up in. I think it was I grew up in Cupertino, California, actually a very diverse place, oddly enough, but like the center of technological innovation in the country, and deeply American at core in a way that I wouldn't necessarily call like New York, for example. Like Cupertino's really, there's a real Americanism to Cupertino because it's like Apple, and it's just all these innovative companies, world dominating companies that built things that shape the way the world functions, not through financial wizardry, but like straight up technological innovation. So I really, really liked Cupertino, and it was safe, and it was clean, and it was educated, and developed, and so it's just a cool place to grow up, and a model for what I think, like, okay, that's America right there. But that's not the only type. Like, there's also like U.S. Steel and like hardworking, like there's different parts of America that make up America, but like Cupertino to me is a part of it. Like that's that's, I guess that probably frames my mindset on a lot of things, is that I grew up in Cupertino. I saw in my world, like, this is the peak of what, in a sense, it's also the peak of like the pro-diversity argument too. It's the best version of diversity, where you have like the cream of the crop from around the world coming to Cupertino to live in a paradise with unbelievable food and unbelievable safety, developing unbelievable technology. Like that's the best version of diversity you're ever going to get.
As long as it doesn't stray too far from those that pioneering spirit and that common law, right?
Exactly, right? Like it's nobody. I mean, Cupertino was safe. There were no, there's no acceptance of crime. It is incredibly innovative. The people are. It's Singaporean, I guess, is like the best. That's the best thing about that world. And diversity doesn't work everywhere, obviously. So I'm not like you're not talking to a person who's like, gosh, we just need like, I'm a conservative, so we just need more diversity. It's not the answer to everything, but rather that that's something I wanted to see that innovation and dynamism is something I want to see preserved. And so I find myself agreeing a lot with tech right type people like Joe Lonsdale and David Sachs. They're of the same place, and they see the same thing I see in that regard.
When they say I believe in America, that's what they're kind of talking about.
Yeah, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about what they've seen their own community do, right? In creating these unbelievably powerful and important companies that have changed the world for the better and have cemented American dominance economically. Like they're a big part of why we have this dominant military, right? Like we Silicon Valley ran the table on almost every major tech company in the last 20 years. Ran the table on all the, all the big ones. And America certainly did. Like the EU doesn't make these companies. They can't. They just don't have what they need to do it. It's a reason that the EU is dependent on this. So common law, innovation, pioneering spirit, and a people and ordered liberty, if you want to call it that. All those things I really want to preserve. And I think that as a result, I'm a Republican and a conservative person who is pro-Trump and anti, wants low immigration and wants a coherent polity, and certainly has absolutely no patience for the kind of crap where they bring 20 million illegal immigrants across the border and inflict people on our cities and make them unsafe. Like all that is just totally antithetical to me.
Do you think there's going to be sufficient punishment for the people who did that thing specifically, and then sufficient punishment, or at least punishment that will deter that happening again?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think we'll be able to punish. I want to, but I don't think we'll be able to punish Biden and Mayorkas for the decision making. I mean, it's ultimately that was a policy decision they made. It was a horrible one, but not something I don't see an obvious criminal prosecution. Will what the Trump administration is doing on the border stop this from happening going forward? I think they've done a lot to really deter illegal immigration for the next generation, honestly.
Really?
I think this is why a lot of people, they're getting on Kristi Noem for doing all these photo ops in El Salvador, and they're like, oh, this looks cringe. Like, you don't get, I disagree. I have a contrarian take on this.
Yeah.
That is messaging, and it's not directed at you. It's directed at the illegal immigrants. It's directed at would-be illegal immigrants. That's who that's for. And that's what why are we spending money on a military plane to take them when it's cheaper to use a commercial plane? That's not a message for you. It's a message for the immigrants. They potential illegal immigrants, if they think if I cross the border, I'm going to get put on a military plane and shipped off to an El Salvadoran prison, they're just not going to do it. Like, you have to look mean enough. You have to look ruthless enough to do it. So, people if that means Kristi Noem is in like a kind of looking a little goofy, but in one of those military suits, but is standing in front in an El Salvadoran prison with a nasty jail behind her, being like, if you come here illegally, this is where you're going to end up.
Well, it works a lot better message-wise than Kamala saying, don't come.
Yeah, it's a lot more visible. It's a lot more like concrete. Right. Don't come. I know you'll get all these benefits if you come, but don't, please. We're running low. Like, that's not it. No, you see these tattooed guys behind me? That's who you're going to hang out with. That's the message.
Why are you a fan of common law? What's specific? Can you just describe that to a total normie? Like, what's the big deal about? Why is this the thing that works wherever it goes? Like, what is the spirit, the animating spirit, like the basic?
That's an interesting question, right? Like, why? Because the difference between common law and sort of French systems is that common law sort of evolves via judges making decisions, and they build on top of each other. Judges will cite previous decisions by judges, and certain doctrines will just evolve kind of independent of a statute, like a law passed by Congress. So, the law of libel was a common law idea. It just evolved through judges determining what libel rules made sense over years. And contract law is another good example. Like, contract law has generally evolved over time.
It's a dialogue rather than some sort of authoritarian or centralized authoritarian.
Yeah, and I think that as a result, the English really prize the common law. That doesn't mean there aren't any statutes. Obviously there are, and they categorize it, but a big part of their legal inheritance is the common law. And I think where the common law works, it works really well. And in particular, it built out, everywhere it went, you have much better contract enforcement, much better property rights, and then the ability for people in those countries to just sort of build things for themselves and their families that last. And
is the essence of our society, well, at least on the material legalistic level, the idea of property? Is that the central foundation?
I mean, it's
or?
really central. Like people, the idea that you can't separate, because property rights are human rights. I think people really underestimate that, right? A property right in the abstract is a statement about who owns something. It's not a statement about the thing. It's about, it's a statement about relations between people, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, property really is at the core of the British system, the American system, and there's all sorts of things that this leads to all sorts of interesting discussions about what happens when property rights, especially in land, aren't formal enough, because they have this problem in Africa where it's like they don't have proper plat lines and deeds, and it's not a centralized property recording system. And the result is you can't borrow based on your land because you don't know what land you own. Right.
Yeah.
And so it creates this foundational problem in their societies where it limits their ability to get capital and economic development. Conversely, in America, we have pristine property rules and property law. Like you go down to the county recorder, you will find how every millimeter of land is divided, who owns it.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things that it's part of the basis of our prosperity.
Yeah. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of property.
Yeah.
As some people interpret that.
Yeah.
What are you, what is your chief concern or your chief project right now? Like, what are you trying to
interesting to say. It's weird because I want to see the Trump administration succeed. I want to see JD Vance get back in office. I mean, because it all connects back to the, preserve the American ideal as I see it. Mm-hmm. And the Republican Party is the vehicle for that. It aligns with much of what Trump is talking about.
Yeah.
I had more specific projects that I thought were important, but I've won on those questions. And that might sound egotistical, but I remember being in 2018 saying things like, we need to treat platform access as a civil right. Social media censorship is going to crush our movement if it's allowed to continue. And while we didn't get a law passed based on that, and we need to work on that, but Elon Musk bought Twitter, and that has dramatically reduced the salience of that particular problem.
Yeah. You don't hear a lot of free speech advocates, right now.
He literally solved it. He just solved the problem. Deus ex machina. The guy straight up came out with 40 billion and just solved it. And as a result of I just will not hear complaining from any conservative about Elon Musk. I just won't hear it. I'm sorry. I mean, you can complain about certain ideas or policies he has, but any sort of personal attack or idea that he shouldn't be involved in the administration, nonsense.
Let the man have 20 wives. Just
he can do whatever he wants. If there's tariffs, he should get an exemption from all of them. You name it. He's earned it. So that was one project. The other was a sort of general idea about the Republican Party becoming more ruthless and more aggressive. I wrote these pieces about peacetime conservatism versus wartime conservatism back in 2019. And at the time I had disagreements, and now I don't. I just don't find myself having disagreements internally on the right anymore. Everybody basically came around to my viewpoint on both of these questions when that wasn't true 6 years ago. So it's sort of weird because once you've actually persuaded your party to agree on an issue where it used to be divided, or other people have persuaded, events have persuaded them. Let's say, let's not be so egotistical. But once they've come around, then what's the point? Do I keep saying the thing I was saying, even though we all agree on it now? Right. Okay. So I don't have I used to have more serious ideological points that I was trying to fight for and win. I don't have any of those right now. I just have I'm very satisfied with the Trump administration. Is
there anything bothersome to you on the right? Or do you think it's all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a weird, how do I put this? There is a weird, anti-Semitism, anti-Israel thing happening, which I think it annoys me because it's dumb, honestly, but it's not as big. And it annoys me because I know Israelis, and especially I know Israeli right people, and there are people, I don't know how to explain it. They're aligned with us. They're dealing with the exact same problems. There's a whole interesting story to be told about the Israeli right having to deal with its own deep state in Israel proper that hasn't really gotten enough airtime. It's a fascinating issue. The Israeli court system makes ours look restrained, frankly. So very under discussed. But I find it annoying. I also find it counterproductive because it leads to this circumstance where there's sort of, you find these anti-Semitic types being like, well, I don't know about the deportation of that Columbia student who, participated in Columbia University apartheid divest. Like, what about his free speech? And I'm like, he's a illegal immigrant who hates our country. Like, what, like, the people you want to align with, like, you found a few immigrants you don't want to deport, and those are the ones who, like, hate America the most. Like, what are you doing? It just seems kind of silly. And it also, I mean, it just annoys me because to me, it's like there's the mocking joke about Israel being our greatest ally, but actually, Israel, the way to think about it is it's a good ally, kind of like Hungary and kind of like El Salvador and kind of like Poland was up until recently, where there aren't actually a lot of countries out there that have been consistently run by conservatives, and not just conservatives, but conservatives who are sort of aligned with us, like national conservatives. And Israel's one of them. And as a result, like, we don't have, many people they think Israel drives American policy. It's like, no, like the need to curry favor with America drives Israeli policy. It's kind of the reverse. And they're a good friend, and they do things like when President Trump is like, yeah, I want to build a wall. Europe, our allies look at us like, you're crazy. That's stupid. You should admit all these illegal immigrants. And Israel and Netanyahu's like, we built a wall. It's great. Walls work really, really well. You should totally do it. We don't, other than like Orban and Bukele and I guess Milei down in Argentina, who else do we point to? There's not many, not many of the people who are on our team. And so I don't like the fact that there's a section of the right that is so obsessed with like trying to create a division between our government and our movement and one of the only other national conservative movements in the world that's been successful. That seems silly. So, so that's, I guess, like, if you're talking about like what annoys me, that would be it. I think also there's also like a different portion of it, which is there's sort of like airbrushing places like Qatar, which is a nasty government and has done nasty things to us and is not an ally.
What's this?
Oh, the government of Qatar. It's Qatar. Qatar.
Oh, I always say Qatar in my head when I read it.
You can go either way. Qatar.
Okay.
But yeah, they're a nasty government. They're not aligned with our interests at all. They're hostile to all our allies in the Middle East. And, like, it is in the American interest that the Saudi, UAE, Israeli axis be the dominant power in the Middle East. And Qatar hates that because they want to work with Turkey and Egypt and Muslim Brotherhood and like all these people and they're the people who want to send Mahmoud Khalil here to talk about, to undermine our country. So, yeah, I don't like I don't like that that's happening on the right, but I actually don't think it's that powerful a movement. So I'm not particularly concerned about it. And to the extent I've been talking about it more recently, honestly, it's because things have been going so well here that I've felt like my intervention is needed less in the American side of things. It's what we talk about. Like, I won on my major issues and the Trump administration is doing what I would like. Yeah. And even when they're not doing what I would like, I can just go talk to them. So, I have friends, so I can go tell them what I think. So I don't feel like the need to complain about government policy that often.
Yeah, I think anti-Semitism specifically and racism in general is kind of just a tar baby. Like, it's best to just have as little contact with it as possible, even when you're trying to curtail it, to be very careful about how, just let it kind of run its course. Because if you get tangled in it, it gets sticky and then it sticks on you.
You actually described a phenomenon that I used to call like Nazi goop, like the idea that certain people would just like try, this was, it goes all the way back to like Unite the Right, where you had the alt-right people. The whole purpose of Unite the Right was they wanted to have us, like Cernovich, Posobiec, me, others of us, come together with them. And we were like, no, actually, we don't want your goop on us. Thank you very much. Go have your own rally. And then they demonstrated exactly why we thought that.
Yeah. Do you have any big projects coming up? Books, movies?
No books,
movies. Animated feature?
About
how Bill is made or something like? Just update that.
Well, I mean, I had that thread that did pretty well on the Abrego Garcia case. That was a really interesting one. And I find that I like to do those. He was the Maryland father.
Maryland father gets deported.
The Maryland father who was, wrongfully deported to El Salvador in an admitted administrative error. But, the details of that case were just a classic example of how screwed up our immigration system is. I mean, the guy had just, you know, he didn't want to leave the country. He came up with a sob story about his feeling a fear of persecution based on the fact that a different gang had extorted his mom's pupusa shop 8 years prior. The pupusa shop was closed, but he still thought if he went back to El Salvador, he'd be killed. Yeah, right. I understand the humanity here. The guy didn't want to leave his fiance and pregnant, his pregnant fiance behind, but he was an illegal immigrant who came here in 2012 and didn't get caught until 2019. He should have gone home. The fact that there was any way to keep him in the country after that was an indictment of our immigration system, which should have tossed him out quickly. And but yet, I don't know. There's still holes in our immigration system, and that's the real story. It's something we need to fix there.
Yeah, yeah. Why do you think Trump and Vance have like the meme magic? Why? What is that? Do you have thoughts on that? Like Trump just does these photo ops, and you're like, wow, how did you? Like, there's something magical about that. Vance
Trump is
kind of like that too, but as a meme, like he's very memeable, but he doesn't quite have Trump's level of photogenic.
Yeah, he's good. So for Trump, obviously, Trump is like the great showman. He's been in media for 40 years. He just knows what it's like to be famous, and that being famous is good. He just has his own personality. And the thing about Trump is Trump never changes his personality depending on who he's talking to. Like, he's always in the same uniform, right? The only hat he'll ever wear is a MAGA hat. He's never dressing down, except if he's on his, like, in golf gear at Mar-a-Lago. Like, otherwise, in any official meeting, he's in his uniform. And, I remember thinking, like, during the DeSantis campaign, and you can see it, they always put the guy in the vest and the jeans to make him look more relatable. Like, what Trump understood is that it's better to be above that. It's better. You're bigger than this relatable.
You're not doing a George Bush guy who wants to have had beers with the common folk kind of thing. That's not your
thing. Trump. It'd be great to meet Trump, but that's not what you're thinking. Like, you're not thinking, oh, I want to sit and have a beer with Trump and talk about the world with him like a buddy. Like, I want to meet him and be entertained by the king. Kind of. Vance is just so naturally down to earth. I think probably as a result of his upbringing, that's just part of who he is. Like, it's not fake. It's not something he has to put on a vest to do. He's literally just that guy. Like, he's the guy who grew up dirt poor in Ohio with a drug-addicted mother who went to Yale Law and joined the military. And then, so he's this brilliant guy from a poor background, the sort of person that our country used to produce in spades and elevate in spades and develop. But doesn't as much anymore. And I think it's because he is so authentically himself as a result of that I think it's that authenticity that makes him memeable. He's the kid who played Magic the Gathering in high school and played poker and had the libertarian phase. So, like, you do all these, the gamer memes where he's got, like, the Xbox controller and used to be chubby. Like, he's just, I don't know. But he's authentic. He is who he is. And so that makes him memeable.
Yeah. What, final, I guess, wrapping up the interview, I'm always really curious about people's perspective on the upcoming generation. Do you have any concerns about, like, specifically young men in the right, or the relations between young men and young women, and thoughts on that? Is that a particularly sticking issue or something?
Well, I saw there was this sort of interesting debate between Megyn Kelly and Matt Walsh about this. Like, should women have careers? Should they not? I thought Cernovich had the best take on it, which is, and this is something I sympathize with, like, the modern world has a lot of technological development, and as a result, the actual amount of housework that needs to be done is a lot lower than it used to be, which is good. That's great. But there's a side effect to that, which is if it is hard, especially to keep people occupied. People need something to occupy them. And oftentimes for women, like, simply having children is not sufficient to occupy them, right? It's enough to occupy them in those first few years, but it may not be enough to occupy them once the children are older in school, certainly not enough to occupy them before they have school. And if they aren't occupied by work or projects or something interesting that is demanding of them, then they'll be occupied by the same, the analogy to video games and weed that we would be occupied by. And so it's not, I don't think the right answer is not just like no work, no career period, unless the wife wants that and she has sufficient enough children to kind of keep her occupied and engaged. And it's certainly not going to be right for everybody. And, but like at the same time, I think Megyn Kelly's not right that, there isn't a cost to these careers, and that especially some careers are really not suited, I believe, to conservative women who are interested in a family. Like I wouldn't tell them to go into big law. That's a terrible idea. It's these 70-hour week. Where does the time with your family come in if you're working 70-hour weeks?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I think young conservative men shouldn't be like, understand Megyn Kelly's point and understand that like, you want to have like, it's good to have an interesting wife who's capable of doing interesting things. And so like trying to completely shield them from work isn't really necessary or even desirable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like it's perfectly understandable to also say you probably don't want someone who's totally obsessed with their career, because that's not someone who's really going to be ready to invest in a family.
Mm-hmm. Do you think conservatives have a chance to kind of dominate the narrative on that level? Like giving...
Yeah.
Because they were boxed into, like you just want to shackle women, barefoot kitchen, kill their rights, their bodily autonomy and stuff like that. But it seems like there's enough female engagement under Trump, which is really ironic because the left, in his first term, they tried to dominate the narrative that he's a total misogynist, but there's so many power women in his orbit. And it seems like American conservatism does have a kind of gender parity going on. There's a lot more movement. Do you think that it needs any special help to kind of cement the well-balanced image of what it provides for young women and young men?
I mean, it's just a better way to structure a family, right? I think that ultimately that's what's kind of bringing it back into vogue. I think young people are realizing that they want a family and they want kids. And for, to a much greater degree than perhaps generations did past it. It's because and I think it's partially because you see the end result of, there's a cliche about, say the woman who's now a partner in big law at 40, but doesn't have any kids and is just like a mess as a result, despite having this massive career achievement. Or, the man, like the ideal of the single man who's still playing the field at 45 with no kids being like not that impressive, actually. Sorry, it's just not like, congratulations on your consumerism. Like, what's this isn't that impressive. So I think we just have a better pitch. And I think in some ways we can, this connects to broader themes, but in some ways that pitch has gotten a little more secularized. And as a result, it's probably a little more broadly appealing, right? Like it's sort of no longer a rooted in religion type pitch to have a family, but rather like people are doing a better job of making that argument on more secular grounds about, personal satisfaction and development. And as a result, I think that you're seeing more and more people kind of come around to building a conservative life, even if they aren't necessarily religious.
Yeah. Well, with that said, how does someone like you hobnob with theocrats and do that dance? Is the right like?
That's such a good question, and there's a good answer to it. Once you recognize that what the left is doing is a religion with far less historical experience, like think about it this way: it's a religion that was invented 50 years ago by Judith Butler. Okay, compare that to a religion that has thousands of years to develop its sort of ethics and metaphysics and whatever. And as a result, the result of what we have in terms of like Christianity or Judaism are both much more sensible and reasonable than the Judith Butler religion. Yeah. And so, whatever I might think about the ideal world where everybody thinks exactly the way I do with this sort of like, pragmatist, epistemological humility type thing that I'm trying to do. Yeah. It's clearly not a system that works for everybody. And so, okay, let's see what actually does work for societies as a whole. And it's like, well, here's your choices.
Is that a fault line in the right? Like the theocrats versus the more secular conservatives? Or
it occasionally comes up, but I think it's just much less of an issue. And the reason is that, there was this big thesis from Christopher Hitchens back in like the early 2000s. Like he wrote a whole book, God is Not Great, Why Religion Poisons Everything. And, whatever you want to say about the new atheists, whatever you want to say about the other debate, which is like, does God exist? And that debate's not resolved perhaps for the satisfaction of the atheists. But what debate is resolved for the satisfaction of everybody on the right is that Hitchens was wrong, that it is not religion that in fact poisons everything, that in fact you can secularize society dramatically and see things get markedly worse in all facets. And as a result, you see things like, there was a panel I would go to in Wisconsin, or this group would always host these events that were kind of new right, dissident right type events. Is an organization called Myth Informed. And that came from the early 2000s New Atheist movement.
Yeah.
And all the new atheists now, well, some of them are just leftists, so they're over with the left, but many of the new atheist types are just conservatives now, even if they're secular. Because the whole point being that, like, clearly religion wasn't the problem here. Religion wasn't the problem in our politics. And moreover, that it's the anti-religious people, the aggressively anti-religious people, especially on the left, who've done so much damage and have, managed to kind of infuse this very destructive pseudo-religion of wokeism into our schools and throughout our lives. That's way worse than anything Christianity ever came up with. And so you just say to yourself, like, well, clearly I'm on the right. Clearly I'm okay with these people winning. And so, and to the extent that the theocrats, I find them more appealing, it's because they generally are sufficiently ruthless enough to think about, like, oh, we need to win. Like, we need to succeed and gain political power. Like, those are the people I sit there, I'm like, yes, you're right. We as the right need to get political power.
Yeah.
Like, 50 years from now, when we have cemented our political power and you're demanding I do X, Y, and Z to akin to your religion, then I might complain. But until then, we're good. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Why does, from your point of view, why does the right deserve power? Political power?
I mean, I think the right is in some ways the more humble party now. And that wasn't necessarily true in the 2000s. I think it's definitely true now. We're the more humble party in a lot of different ways. Foreign policy, we're more humble. About truth and knowledge, we're a little bit more humble, I think. The left has gotten kind of radicalized and dogmatic in a terrible way. So I think one is we're more humble. Two is we're more respectful of tradition, respectful of the traditions that actually made the country great. Like we talked about the Anglo-Saxon tradition, the common law, the tradition of innovation and dynamism. And we don't want to make boys play. We don't want to let boys play in girl sports. Like, something as simple as that just kind of reveals everything that's wrong with the left. Like this triumph of ideology over pragmatism, the indifference to individual suffering. So there's a lot of reasons why I think the left doesn't deserve power, and I think the right is just made up of a lot more humble, competent people capable of, continuing the grand American experiment.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and I'm at this point rather biased, but there's a lot more diversity of thought in the right. There's a lot more willingness to engage with spicy ideas or difficult conversations, or like get into the nitty gritty and look at things in a not necessarily non-ideological way, but a poly-ideology way. Let ideologies kind of go head to head and see what happens from that. So more creative in a way.
I feel perfectly at home on the right, despite disagreeing with a large bulk of who might. I'm secular and I'm on the right. That's weird. I'm not the average conservative. Okay, but that doesn't change my standing, as far as I can tell. Yeah. So that's cool. Like, if I disagree with something major like that, I couldn't even be on the left.
Yeah. Will Chamberlain, is there anything for you to plug? I've brought up
yes. Go to our Article 3, a3paction.org. That's where you can participate in any number of our campaigns that bully senators into doing what we want. Which is a very useful thing to do, because your senators, while they may not pay attention to the general hubbub, they do pay attention to what their constituents say. So go ahead and do that.
So you've developed a system by which people can feel a little bit of bone-breaking political power from
a little bit of
just
that little bit of bullying to have fun on any given day. And this stuff actually does work. There was a lot of talk about the Senate not confirming certain nominees, and it's not just us. We managed to get hundreds of thousands of direct contacts to senators, and there's been plenty of people who've credited that with changing the senators' mind and giving them an attitude adjustment. So that's a real thing.
That's good. That's good to hear that there is some sort of feedback loop between us and our government. or
Yes.
representatives.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I'm going to end the recording. Thank you so much, Will, for joining me for a chat today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it. Thanks, Ben.
Sweet. Wait, hold on. Before you hang up,